Tiffany Henderson woke up with a heaviness in her chest that had been haunting her for several days. Her apartment in downtown Vancouver greeted her with its usual silence. Only the sound of rain outside the window broke the morning tranquility. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to find the strength to get up. Today, she had to tell the truth. The truth that would destroy her 2-year relationship with Demetrius and possibly change her life forever. The phone on the bedside table flashed with notifications. Tiffany reached for it and saw messages from subscribers eagerly awaiting the evening stream. Her travel and lifestyle blog had gathered almost 100,000 followers over the past 2 years. People trusted her, considered her sincere and open. And that's why she couldn't lie anymore. Getting out of bed, Tiffany slowly walked to the window and looked out at the rainy street. Gray clouds hung low over the city, as if reflecting her mood. Passers-by hurried under their umbrellas. Cars crawled slowly along the wet asphalt, and somewhere in the distance, the lights of Vancouver could be seen. The familiar cityscape seemed strange and indifferent to her today. She picked up her phone and dialed Alicia's number. Her friend was the only person who knew about her inner struggle. "Hi, sunshine," Alicia's cheerful voice rang out. "How are you? Getting ready for today's stream?" "Lissy," Tiffany paused, searching for the right words. "I'm going to tell everyone today." The pause dragged on. Alicia clearly wasn't expecting to hear this. "Are you serious?" Her friend's voice became quieter and more cautious. "Are you sure this is the right decision? I can't pretend everything is fine anymore. My subscribers deserve honesty, and I deserve honesty with myself," Alicia sighed. "Then be careful. Demetrius isn't the type to forgive easily. Remember how he reacted when you were just talking to that waiter at the cafe a month ago?" Tiffany remembered that evening as a nightmare. Demetrius had made a scene of jealousy for an hour, accusing her of flirting and disrespecting their relationship. She tried to explain that she was just being polite to the guy who brought their order, but Demetrius wouldn't listen. He yelled that she was smiling at the waiter on purpose, that it looked suggestive, that she didn't understand the boundaries of propriety. "I know, but I can't live like this anymore. Every day I feel like I'm suffocating, like I'm not living my own life." "Okay, then do what you think is right, but be prepared for the consequences. And remember, whatever happens, you can always count on me." After the conversation, Tiffany made breakfast, oatmeal with berries and coffee, but she didn't feel like eating at all. She sat at the kitchen table, mechanically stirring her coffee and thinking about how to phrase what she wanted to say. Various options for how to begin the conversation swirled around in her head, but they all seemed inadequate or too dramatic. Tiffany's apartment was on the 7th floor of a prefabricated building and consisted of a spacious living room combined with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small study, which she had turned into a photography studio. The walls were painted in light colors, and photographs from her travels, Iceland, Japan, Mexico, Norway, hung everywhere. These pictures reminded her of a time when life seemed full of possibilities and freedom. Demetrius often said that her passion for travel was just a way to escape reality. He preferred stability and predictability, working in the studio, evenings at home in front of the TV. At first, Tiffany thought it was nice to have a quiet haven after months on the road. But over time, the quiet haven began to feel like a cage. The day dragged on painfully slowly. Tiffany tried to go about her usual business, responding to comments on social media, editing photos for future posts, planning content for the following week. But her thoughts kept returning to the upcoming stream. She picked up her phone several times to write to Demetrius, but each time she put it down. What could she say? That she was going to publicly admit to cheating? Around 2 in the afternoon, she tried to eat a salad, but after a few spoonfuls, she realized she couldn't swallow. Her nerves were stretched to the limit. Tiffany turned on some music, quiet indie tunes that usually helped her relax. But even that didn't work. One thought kept running through her head. In a few hours, her life would change dramatically. Around 4 o'clock, Tyrone texted her. "How are you? I'm thinking of you." Tiffany looked at the message and felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Tyrone Roberts had come into her life 3 weeks ago when she was working at the Grind Coffee Cafe on a new post about winter locations for photo shoots. He ordered a cappuccino and, noticing her laptop with an open graphics editor, cautiously struck up a conversation about photography and visual content. They talked for 2 hours, and time flew by. Tyrone turned out to be a programmer who had moved to Vancouver from Toronto for a new job at a startup developing mobile apps. He was calm, attentive, a good listener, and asked the right questions. Tiffany felt comfortable and at ease with him. For the first time in a long time, she could talk about her plans and dreams without fear of criticism or skepticism. Demetrius had always treated her passion for blogging as child's play. He said that adults should do serious work, not post photos on the internet. Tyrone, on the other hand, was genuinely interested in her work and even offered several ideas for improving her website. When they met again a week later, and then again, something more than just friendship developed between them. And when they ended up in her bed 5 days ago, it happened so naturally that she didn't even have time to get scared. Only later, lying next to him and listening to his steady breathing, did Tiffany realize that she had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. "Today I'm going to tell the truth," she wrote in response to Tyrone. "Are you sure? You can still think about it." "Yes. I can't lie anymore. It's eating away at me. Be careful. And remember, I'm here for you, no matter what happens." By evening, the rain had stopped, but gray clouds still hung over the city. Tiffany took a shower, put on her favorite blue dress, the one that made her feel most confident, and began to prepare for the stream. She set up the camera, checked the sound and lighting, and laid out her notes with topics for discussion, even though she knew that today she would be talking about something completely different. At 6:30, she went into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, the result of several sleepless nights. Tiffany applied a little makeup so she wouldn't look completely sick and returned to her makeshift studio. At 7 p.m., she turned on the broadcast. "Hello, my dears," she said, looking into the camera and trying to keep her voice steady. "Today I have a special stream for you. I want to talk to you honestly about what's going on in my life." Viewers began to join the broadcast. Comments appeared one after another, greetings, questions about upcoming trips, heart and smile emojis. Tiffany watched as the number of participants grew, 100, 200, 500 people, and felt her heartbeat quicken. "You know, I've always told you that honesty is the foundation of any relationship. Honesty with yourself, with your loved ones, with those around you. And today, I want to be honest with you and with myself." She paused, gathering her courage. "I cheated on my boyfriend." The stream of comments froze for a second, as if the viewers couldn't believe what they had heard, and then exploded with messages. Questions, exclamations, advice, condemnation. Everything mixed into one chaotic stream. Tiffany didn't read them. She looked straight into the camera as if addressing each viewer personally. 3 weeks ago, I met a man who made it easy for me to breathe. His name is Tyrone. We met several times, talked for a long time, and yes, something happened between us. Her voice trembled, but she continued to speak slowly and clearly. "I know I did the wrong thing. I should have broken up with Demetrius first and then started something new. But sometimes life doesn't go according to a pre-written plan." The comments section was a real storm. Some wrote that they supported her right to happiness. Others accused her of immorality and betrayal. Some advised her to immediately apologize to her boyfriend, while others, on the contrary, urged her to be brave and follow her heart. Tiffany read the messages in bits and pieces, but didn't stop talking. "I'm not justifying my actions. Cheating is wrong. It hurts everyone involved. But I don't want to pretend to be happy when I'm not. I don't want to lie to you or myself." A relationship is not a prison, and if there is no room for growth, understanding, and happiness, perhaps it is worth honestly reconsidering it. She talked about how she gradually began to feel suffocated in her relationship with Demetrius, about his jealousy of her work, her friends, any sign of independence, about how he criticized her hobbies and dreams, calling them frivolous, about how, in recent months, she woke up feeling anxious and fell asleep feeling like she was living someone else's life. The stream lasted another half hour. Tiffany answered questions from viewers, explained her position, thanked them for their support, and ignored particularly malicious comments. Some subscribers unsubscribed right during the broadcast, but new viewers also appeared, attracted by the unusual candor of the stream. When she finally turned off the broadcast, she felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. The truth had been told. Now all that remained was to wait for the consequences. Tiffany knew that in an hour or two, Demetrius would find out about the stream. Someone they both knew would surely tell him or send him the link. Meanwhile, at the Wave Sound recording studio on the other side of town, Demetrius Clark sat at the sound console and watched the stream recording on his phone. He turned it on by accident when he saw a notification about the start of the girl's broadcast and couldn't tear himself away. At first, he planned to watch for a couple of minutes. Tiffany sometimes told funny stories from their life together in her streams, and Demetrius loved to hear her talk about him with love. But today she was talking about something completely different. Demetrius's face was expressionless. He seemed to have turned into a mask. Only his eyes grew colder with every word Tiffany spoke. His jaws were clenched tightly, his hands resting motionless on the remote control. When she said the name Tyrone, something twitched in the corner of his mouth, but he remained silent and continued watching. There was almost no one in the studio, just him and Kevin, the night DJ in the next room, who was getting ready to go on air. Demetrius was glad to be alone. He needed time to digest what he had heard and decide what to do next. When the broadcast ended, he slowly put his phone in his jacket pocket and went back to work. He was scheduled to mix a new track for a local rap group today, but he wasn't in the mood for creativity right now. Demetrius mechanically adjusted the sound, checked the equipment, and thought about how Tiffany, as always after her streams, would go to the kitchen to brew her favorite green tea. She did this every time after public performances. She said that tea helped her calm down and organize her thoughts. Demetrius knew this habit of hers by heart, just as he knew all her habits from their 2 years together. He knew that she liked to sleep on her left side, that she read before bed, that she always left an unfinished cup of coffee on the kitchen table. He knew and used this knowledge. Tiffany did indeed go to the kitchen as soon as she turned off her computer. Her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline and nervous tension of the last hour. She felt drained, like a squeezed lemon. Her emotional strength was running out, and all she wanted to do was crawl under the covers and sleep until morning. She took the familiar tin of green tea out of the cupboard, the same sencha variety she had been buying for 2 years at a Japanese shop in the city center. This tea always helped her relax after a stressful day, calming her nerves and clearing her mind. The shopkeeper said that this variety was especially good for meditation and calming the mind. After brewing the tea in her favorite ceramic cup, white, with a delicate blue pattern around the rim, Tiffany went into the living room and sat down on the sofa. The first sip seemed a little strange to her. The taste was more bitter than usual, with a metallic tinge. Tiffany frowned, but decided it was due to stress and fatigue. Everything seems different when you're nervous. She finished her tea, placed the cup on the coffee table next to the TV remote and a stack of travel magazines, and leaned back on the sofa. The apartment was silent, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of cars outside the window. It had started raining again outside, and the raindrops tapped on the glass in a monotonous, lulling rhythm. Tiffany closed her eyes and tried to relax. The hardest part was over. Now all that remained was to wait for Demetrius's reaction and somehow get through the inevitable breakup. She had no illusions that he would forgive her. Demetrius was not the kind of person who forgave betrayal, even if the relationship had long since reached an impasse. 10 minutes after she finished her tea, Tiffany felt slightly dizzy. At first, she thought it was due to fatigue and emotional stress, but then she realized that something was wrong. Her heart began to beat irregularly, and an unpleasant metallic taste appeared in her mouth, which she had already tasted in the tea. A few minutes later, she found it difficult to breathe. The air seemed to thicken, and each breath was difficult. Tiffany tried to get up from the sofa, but her legs wouldn't obey her. They felt like cotton wool and were unresponsive. Her hands also began to go numb. Her panic grew with every passing second. Tiffany knew something serious was happening, that she needed medical attention, but her body refused to obey. She tried to reach for the phone on the table, but her hand fell before it could reach its goal. The last thing she had time to think was that she needed to call an ambulance. But she had no strength left for anything. Detective Candace Mitchell received a call at 6:30 in the morning as she was finishing her first cup of coffee in her apartment on the outskirts of Vancouver. The phone rang sharply and insistently, shattering the morning silence. It wasn't quite dawn outside yet. October days were getting shorter, and the sun rose late, hidden behind thick clouds. "Mitchell here," she said into the receiver, already sensing that her plans for a quiet morning would have to be canceled. "Candace, we have a body." Sergeant Cole's voice sounded tired. "A young woman, 22 years old. Neighbors found her late last night. I'll send the address to your phone." "Cause of death?" "Not clear yet. The medical examiner is on site. Says it looks like poisoning. No signs of violence." Detective Mitchell wrote down the address, and half an hour later was driving through the empty morning streets of the city to the scene. At 38, she was one of the most experienced detectives in the homicide division, but each new case still required her to mobilize in a special way. The death of young people was always a painful subject. Too many unanswered questions, too many unfulfilled plans. The building where Tiffany Henderson lived turned out to be a typical red brick apartment complex, 9 stories, built in the 90s. Police cars were already parked near the entrance, and curious neighbors were crowding around the stairwell despite the early hour. Mitchell parked and went up to the 7th floor, where she was met by Officer Johnson. "What do we have?" the detective asked, pulling on her gloves. "Tiffany Henderson, 22 years old, blogger. Her neighbor found her yesterday around 11 p.m. The door was unlocked and she was lying on the sofa in the living room." Johnson leafed through his notebook. "The neighbor says she heard a noise, then a long silence. She decided to check on her." "Is the neighbor still here?" "Yes, Mrs. Cheng. She lives in the apartment across the hall. She's very upset, but she's ready to answer questions." Mitchell nodded and entered the apartment. The first impression was deceptively peaceful. Light-colored walls, neatly arranged furniture, lots of photos on the walls. There was no sign of a struggle or violence. In the living room, a young black woman in a blue dress was lying on the sofa. Her posture looked natural, as if she had simply fallen asleep. Medical examiner Dr. Raymond leaned over the body, making preliminary notes. "What can you tell us?" Mitchell asked. "Preliminary findings indicate poisoning. I can't say what exactly yet. We need test results. But the symptoms are characteristic. Cyanosis of the lips and a specific odor. Death occurred quickly, most likely within half an hour after ingesting the poison." Dr. Raymond pointed to the coffee table. "Here's the cup she drank from. We'll send it for analysis." Mitchell carefully examined the living room. On the table was a white ceramic cup with tea residue, a TV remote, and a stack of travel magazines. Next to the sofa, a laptop lay on the floor. Apparently, it had fallen when Tiffany felt ill. The screen was broken. In the corner of the living room, a professional camera on a tripod was pointed at the armchair by the window. Next to it were spotlights and a microphone. Tiffany obviously recorded her vlogs here. "Was she a blogger?" Mitchell asked Johnson. "Yes, a pretty popular one. Almost 100,000 followers on social media, travel, lifestyle, all that stuff." The detective walked through the apartment, examining each room. The bedroom was tidy, the bed was made, clothes were hanging in the closet. On the bedside table lay a book about photography and a phone charger. Everything in the bathroom was in its place, no signs of haste or panic. The kitchen was also in order, except for a single plate and fork in the sink, apparently the remains of dinner. An open tin of green tea lay on the table. Mitchell photographed it and asked for it to be packed up for examination. "Where's the victim's phone?" she asked. "Here, on the sofa next to her," Johnson pointed. "Last activity was yesterday at 7:43 p.m., some kind of streaming app." Mitchell picked up the phone with gloves on and looked through the recent activity. Tiffany had been live streaming from 7 to 7:40 p.m., then responded to several messages on social media. The last activity was at 7:45 p.m., a reply to a comment under the video. "I need to watch this stream," said the detective, and questioned the neighbors. She went out onto the landing, where an elderly Asian woman in a housecoat was waiting for her. Mrs. Cheng looked upset and frightened. "Tell me what happened last night," Mitchell asked gently. "I was making dinner. It was around 8 o'clock, Mrs. Cheng began with a noticeable accent. "I heard Tiffany talking loudly. I thought she was filming a video again. Then it got quiet. Very quiet. I'm used to hearing music or the TV from her apartment in the evenings." "What happened next?" "Around 11 I heard a noise like something had fallen. I waited 10 minutes, then decided to check. I knocked on the door. No one answered. I tried the handle. The door opened. I went in and..." The woman sobbed. "She was lying on the sofa. I knew right away that she was dead." "Did you know Tiffany well?" "Not very well, but we sometimes talked in the elevator. She was a nice girl, always said hello, helped me with my bags. She has a boyfriend, Demetrius. He's tall and works somewhere in the music industry." "Did he visit her often?" Mrs. Cheng thought for a moment. "He used to, almost every day, but less often in recent weeks, maybe twice a week. And they sometimes argued. You could hear it through the wall." "What did they argue about?" "I don't know exactly, but he often raised his voice. Something about her job, about her spending too much time on the internet." Mitchell recorded the testimony and interviewed several other neighbors. A contradictory picture emerged. Everyone considered Tiffany a nice and friendly girl, but according to her neighbors, her relationship with her boyfriend had been strained lately. Back at the station, the detective first opened Tiffany's social media accounts and found yesterday's broadcast. What she heard made her sit up and take notice. A public confession of infidelity a few hours before her death was too serious a coincidence to ignore. Mitchell watched the broadcast twice, taking notes. Tiffany looked nervous but determined. She talked about meeting someone named Tyrone, about cheating on her boyfriend, about problems in her relationship with Demetrius. The viewers' comments were heated, ranging from support to condemnation. "We need to find this Demetrius," the detective muttered and opened the database. Demetrius Clark, 25 years old, works as a sound engineer at Wave Sound Studio. Clean record, no criminal convictions. His address was in another part of town, about a half-hour drive from Tiffany's apartment. Mitchell called the studio and learned that Demetrius had been at work until late in the evening. The manager confirmed that he had been at the studio from 2 p.m. until 9:30 p.m., working on mixing a track. "I want to talk to him today," said the detective. "Does he know about his friend's death?" "I don't think so. He should be in by 2 o'clock. Mitchell decided to wait and meet Demetrius at his workplace. In the meantime, she studied Tiffany's social media profiles, trying to understand what kind of person she was and who might have wanted her dead. A vivid picture emerged, a young woman passionate about travel and photography, with thousands of followers who kept up with her life. Her latest posts were about her plans for the winter and new projects. There was no indication of depression or suicidal thoughts. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mitchell arrived at Wave Sound Studios. It was a modern building in the city center that housed several recording studios and music label offices. At the reception desk, she was told that Demetrius had just arrived and was in studio number 3. The detective went up to the second floor and knocked on the door marked Studio 3. The door was opened by a tall black man with a neatly trimmed beard. He was dressed in a black shirt and jeans and looked calm and collected. "Demetrius Clark?" Mitchell asked, showing her badge. "Detective Mitchell, Vancouver Police Department. May I speak with you?" His expression changed, becoming wary. "Of course. What's this about?" "It's about Tiffany Henderson. I have to tell you that she died last night." Demetrius froze, as if he didn't understand what he had heard. Then he slowly walked over to a chair and sat down. "Died? How? What happened?" "That's what we're trying to find out. Can we talk in a more private setting?" He nodded and led her into a small conference room next to the studio. Mitchell watched his reaction closely. Demetrius looked shocked, but strangely composed for someone who had just learned of a young woman's death. "When was the last time you saw Tiffany?" the detective asked, turning on her tape recorder. "The day before yesterday morning. I stopped by her place before work, and we had breakfast together." Demetrius's voice was steady, almost monotonous. "What happened to her?" "Preliminary reports indicate poisoning. Tell me about your relationship with Tiffany." Demetrius rubbed his forehead with his hand. "We dated for 2 years. We met at a party thrown by mutual friends. She was a blogger, and I work here at the studio. We had a serious relationship." "Did you live together?" "No. We each had our own apartments, but I often stayed at her place and she stayed at mine." "Were there any problems in your relationship?" Demetrius paused, as if considering his answer. "Like all couples, we sometimes had disagreements, but nothing serious. We loved each other." "What were your disagreements about?" "Well, I thought she spent too much time on social media. Sometimes it got in the way of our communication. She also had a lot of male followers who wrote her compliments. That annoyed me." Mitchell noticed how carefully he chose his words. "Did you know about her broadcast yesterday?" "What live stream?" "Last night at 7 o'clock, Tiffany did a live stream where she said she had cheated on you with another man." Demetrius slowly looked up at the detective. Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, pain, or something else. But his expression remained controlled. "I didn't know about that," he said quietly. "I was working until 9:30 last night. The sound engineer and I were mixing a track for a band. Can your colleague confirm that?" "Of course. Ask Kevin Marshall. He was with me." "How would you react to such news?" Demetrius was silent for a long time, staring out the window. "I would be upset, of course. No one wants to find out about cheating, especially publicly, but I would try to talk to her, find out what's going on." "Have you ever threatened Tiffany?" "No, never. I'm not the type to solve problems with threats." Mitchell studied his face. Something about Demetrius's behavior seemed unnatural to her. His reaction to the news of his beloved girlfriend's death was too restrained, his answers too cautious. Most people in such a situation would have become hysterical, asked a lot of questions, demanded details. Demetrius, however, only answered direct questions and showed no visible emotion. "Where were you yesterday after work?" she asked. "I went home. I took a shower, had dinner, and went to bed. I was very tired." "Can anyone confirm that you were at home?" "No, I live alone." "Do you know Tyrone Roberts?" Demetrius shook his head. "I've never heard that name. That's the man Tiffany said she had an affair with." Not a muscle moved in Demetrius's face. "I see." Mitchell ended the interview and asked Demetrius not to leave town without warning. As she left the studio, she thought about what she had heard. His alibi only lasted until 9:30, and Tiffany died around 8. Theoretically, he could have made it to her apartment if he left right after work. But the strangest thing was his reaction. He was too calm for an innocent man. The detective returned to the station and called sound engineer Kevin Marshall. He confirmed that Demetrius had indeed worked until 9:30 and looked normal. "True, he was a little distracted during the last hour," Kevin added, "but I thought he was just tired." "Did he use his phone while working?" Yes. At about 7:30, he looked at something on the screen for about 10 minutes. But then he put his phone away and didn't take it out again. Mitchell wrote down this observation. 7:30 was exactly the time of Tiffany's broadcast. Perhaps Demetrius did know about her confession after all. That meant he had a motive for murder. The next day, Detective Mitchell decided to talk to Tiffany's close friends. From social media, she learned that the deceased's best friend was Alicia Thompson, a cosmetologist who worked at a beauty salon in downtown Vancouver. Judging by the photos and comments, the girls had been friends for several years and often spent time together. Glam Studio was located on the first floor of a shopping center and looked modern and stylish. Mitchell went inside, where she was greeted by the smell of cosmetics and soft music. Behind the reception desk stood a young black woman with perfect makeup and neatly styled hair. "Excuse me, are you Alicia Thompson?" asked the detective, showing her ID. The girl paled when she saw the police badge. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" "I need to talk to you about Tiffany Henderson. Is there somewhere quiet we can talk?" Alicia nodded and led her into a small break room for employees. They sat down at a round table and Mitchell gently broke the news of Tiffany's death. "No, that's impossible." Alicia shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "We talked on the phone just the day before yesterday. She was going to tell the truth on her stream. I tried to talk her out of it, saying that Demetrius wouldn't take it well. Tell me more about your relationship with Tiffany." Alicia took a pack of tissues out of her purse and dabbed her eyes. "We had been friends for 4 years, since college. Tiff was like a sister to me. We told each other everything." Her voice trembled. "She was a good person, kind. She didn't deserve this." "What can you tell me about her relationship with Demetrius?" Alicia's face darkened. At first, everything was fine. He seemed attentive and caring, but gradually he began to change. He became more and more controlling and jealous. Tiff complained that he checked her phone and asked questions about every man she talked to. "Has anything changed in their relationship lately?" Alicia thought for a moment. "Yes, for the last 2 weeks Tiff said that Demetrius had been acting strangely. He suddenly stopped making jealous scenes and became suspiciously affectionate and calm. Tiff said that this scared her more than his outbursts of anger." "Why did it scare her?" "She said he looked like he was up to something. You know, like when someone has made a decision and is now waiting for the right moment. Tiff even joked that she was afraid he might slip poison into her coffee." The detective became alert. "Did she really say that? About the poison?" "Yes, but I thought she was just nervous about the upcoming breakup. No one thinks something like that could actually happen." "Did Tiffany know that Demetrius was monitoring her correspondence or installing some kind of surveillance software?" "She suspected it. She said he knew too much about her plans even though she hadn't told him. And he once mentioned details of her conversation with one of her subscribers, even though it was a private message." "Did she tell you about Tyrone Roberts?" Alicia nodded. "Yes, she was very excited about this acquaintance. She said she felt comfortable with him, that she could be herself. Tiff had wanted to break up with Demetrius for a long time, but she was afraid of his reaction. And meeting Tyrone was the last straw." "Afraid of his reaction in what sense?" "Demetrius could be very verbally abusive when he was angry. He humiliated her, saying that without him she was nothing, that her blog was stupid, and that her followers were losers. After such conversations, Tiff would cry for days." Mitchell recorded the testimony, mentally piecing together a picture of a toxic relationship. A controlling partner who suddenly changed his behavior, a girl who decided to break out of the relationship and announced it publicly. The motive for the murder was becoming increasingly obvious. "When was the last time you spoke to Tiffany?" "The morning of her death. She called and said she had decided to reveal everything in a live stream. I tried to dissuade her, suggesting she talk to Demetrius in person first, but she said she couldn't pretend anymore." "How did she seem in the last few days? Was there anything unusual about her behavior?" "She was nervous, but at the same time determined." She said that she finally felt alive after meeting Tyrone. She also complained that she wasn't sleeping well, often waking up at night because of some noises. What kind of noises? She said it sounded like someone was walking around the apartment, but she checked and there was no one there. She thought it was just her nerves. The detective thanked Alicia for her honesty and asked her to contact her if she remembered anything else important. Leaving the salon, Mitchell thought about what she had heard. Tiffany suspected she was being followed, feared Demetrius's reaction, and even joked about poison. It no longer seemed like a coincidence. The next step was to find Tyrone Roberts. Mitchell returned to the station and found his address through the databases. Tyrone worked as a programmer for a mobile app development company and lived in a rented apartment in the Kitsilano neighborhood. The detective arrived at his home around 6 in the evening. Tyrone turned out to be a thin young man with attentive eyes and neatly trimmed hair. When he opened the door and saw the police badge, his face showed concern. "Tyrone Roberts, Detective Mitchell, Vancouver Police. Can I talk to you about Tiffany Henderson?" "Of course. Come in." He stepped aside. "What about Tiffany? She hasn't responded to messages for 2 days." Mitchell walked into a small living room furnished with simple furniture. There were 2 laptops on the table and programming books scattered everywhere. "I need to tell you that Tiffany died the night before last." Tyrone froze, as if he didn't understand what he had heard, then slowly sank into a chair. "Died? But how? We just saw each other recently. What happened?" "Preliminary reports indicate poisoning." "Tell me about your relationship with Tiffany." Tyrone rubbed his temples with his hands. "We met 3 weeks ago in a cafe. I noticed she was working with photos and we started talking. Then we met a few more times." He looked at the detective. "I know she had a boyfriend. Tiffany said she was going to break up with him." "What did she say about Demetrius?" "That he was very jealous and controlling. He checked her phone, didn't let her talk to her male friends, and criticized her work. Tiffany felt trapped." "Did she say anything about Demetrius acting strangely lately?" Tyrone nodded. "Yes, she said he's been acting very suspiciously lately. He's become overly affectionate and stopped making scenes. Tiffany was alarmed by this. She said he looked like he was up to something." "Was she afraid of him?" "Definitely, especially after she decided to tell the truth publicly. She said Demetrius might do something terrible when he found out about the affair." "Did you know about her plans to stream her confession?" "Yes, she called me on the day of the stream and said she couldn't lie anymore. I tried to talk her out of it, suggested she wait until she had spoken to Demetrius in person, but she said her mind was made up." "Where were you the night before last?" "At home, working on a project. I have a deadline this week, so I spent the whole evening at the computer." "Can anyone confirm your alibi?" "I was chatting with my coworkers, so there should be records of the conversation with the timestamp." Mitchell wrote down his colleague's contact details to verify his alibi. Tyrone seemed like a sincere person, and he had no obvious motive for killing Tiffany. "One last question. Were you and Tiffany planning a serious relationship?" Tyrone smiled sadly. "We both knew there was something special between us, but I didn't want to rush things until she had sorted out her past life. Now it's too late." Back at the station, the detective discovered that the results of the examination of the tea from Tiffany's apartment had arrived. The toxicologist confirmed the presence of cyanide in the tea leaves. But the most interesting thing was something else. The analysis showed that the poison had been in the tea for at least 3 days. This meant that the killer had mixed cyanide into the tea jar in advance, knowing Tiffany's habit of drinking green tea after her streams. This was not a spontaneous revenge for public humiliation, but a premeditated murder. Mitchell studied Tiffany's broadcast schedule for the past month. The girl streamed 3 times a week, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, always at 7 p.m. After each stream, she would post on social media about how she drank green tea to calm down. This information was available to all her subscribers, but it was especially well known to the person who had been dating her for 2 years. The detective made a plan for further action. Tomorrow she would obtain a search warrant for Demetrius's apartment and check his alibi more thoroughly. So far, everything pointed to him poisoning his girlfriend after learning of her plans to publicly confess to her infidelity. The next morning, Detective Mitchell obtained a search warrant for Demetrius Clark's apartment. The judge reviewed the evidence gathered, witness testimony about the suspect's strange behavior, test results confirming cyanide poisoning, and the temporal connection between the confession stream and the victim's death. This was enough to issue a search warrant. At 10 in the morning, Mitchell, accompanied by 2 officers, arrived at the house where Demetrius lived. It was an old brick house divided into several apartments. Demetrius rented a 2-room apartment on the 2nd floor, spacious but rather gloomy due to the small windows and dark furniture. When the detective rang the doorbell, Demetrius opened the door almost immediately. He was dressed in his home clothes and looked as if he hadn't slept all night. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his face was gaunt. "We have a warrant to search your apartment," Mitchell said, handing him the document, "in connection with the investigation of the death of Tiffany Henderson." Demetrius took the warrant and read it slowly. His hands trembled slightly, but his expression remained calm. "Of course, come in. Do what you need to do." The apartment was neat, almost sterile. In the living room stood a large audio system, shelves with vinyl records and musical equipment. On the wall hung photos of Tiffany. They were hugging, smiling at the camera, looking happy. Mitchell noted that most of the photos were taken more than a year ago. In the bedroom, the detective noticed a workbench by the window. There was a small vise, a set of metalworking tools, and several unfinished pieces of jewelry, earrings and a pendant. Everything was covered with a thin layer of dust, as if Demetrius hadn't pursued this hobby in a long time. "Do you make jewelry?" Mitchell asked. "Sometimes. It helps me relax after working in the studio," Demetrius replied, standing in the bedroom doorway. "But I haven't had time lately." Meanwhile, Officer Johnson was searching the kitchen and pantry. Mitchell heard him find something. "Detective, look at this," he called from the pantry. On the top shelf, between the cans of food, was a small plastic container with a tightly screwed-on lid. Inside was a white crystalline powder. The label read, "Sodium cyanide for processing precious metals. Caution, poison." "It's for working with silver," Demetrius said quickly. "Cyanide is used for polishing and cleaning metals." "When did you buy this substance?" Mitchell asked, photographing the find. "I don't remember exactly. 2 months ago, probably." "Where did you buy it?" Demetrius hesitated. "In a specialty store, the kind that sells tools for jewelers." Mitchell packed the container into an evidence bag and continued the search. In the trash can under the kitchen sink, the officer found a crumpled receipt from a chemical supply store. The date of purchase was 10 days before Tiffany's death. Sodium cyanide was listed on the shopping list. "Do you remember this purchase?" the detective asked, showing Demetrius the receipt. He looked at the paper and nodded. "Yes, I ran out of my old supply. I decided to buy a new one." "For making jewelry?" "Exactly." But when Mitchell took a closer look at Demetrius's workspace, it became clear that he hadn't been doing jewelry for a long time. The tools were covered in dust, and there were no signs of recent use of cyanide for metal processing in the desk drawers. The most interesting discovery awaited the detective in Demetrius's computer. An officer specializing in computer technology looked through the browser history and found several suspicious search queries made over the past 2 weeks. Lethal dose of sodium cyanide. How long does cyanide last? Symptoms of cyanide poisoning. Can cyanide be detected in tea? How to mask the taste of cyanide. The list of queries was long and very telling. "Can you explain these search queries?" Mitchell asked, showing him the printout. Demetrius turned pale when he saw the list. I was reading a detective novel where a character was poisoned with cyanide. I became curious about how realistic the description of poisoning in the book was. What was the name of the book? I don't remember. I downloaded it from the internet. Show me the file. I deleted it after reading it. Mitchell knew this was a blatant lie. There were too many coincidences. The purchase of cyanide, the search queries about poisons, the strange behavior in the last days of Tiffany's life. It was time for a serious interrogation. Mr. Clark, you need to come with us to the station for further questioning, said the detective. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but we have some serious questions that you need to answer. At the station, Mitchell sat Demetrius down in the interrogation room, a small room with gray walls, a table, and 3 chairs. She turned on the tape recorder and placed a folder with evidence in front of him. Mr. Clark, let's be honest. We have evidence that you purchased cyanide 10 days before Tiffany's death. Your search history shows an interest in the effects of this poison, and the autopsy confirmed that Tiffany died of cyanide poisoning. Demetrius remained silent, staring at the table. We also know that the poison was in the tea for several days. This means that the murder was planned in advance. Who else besides you knew about Tiffany's habit of drinking green tea after her streams? Many people. She wrote about it on social media. But who else had access to her apartment? Who had keys? I don't know. Mitchell opened a folder and took out photos from the crime scene, the results of the examination, and the receipt for the purchase of cyanide. Your colleague Kevin said that on the day of Tiffany's death, you were looking at something on your phone at around 7:30 p.m. That was the time of her stream, where she confessed to cheating. Did you see that broadcast? Demetrius looked up at the detective. Pain flashed in his eyes. Yes, he said quietly. I saw it. And how did you feel when you heard about her cheating? Anger, pain, humiliation. She told thousands of people about it instead of talking to me. Strong enough to want to kill her? Demetrius was silent for a long time, then slowly nodded. I put poison in her tea 3 days earlier. I knew she was cheating on me. I read her correspondence with this Tyrone guy. She was going to leave me. His voice became monotonous. I couldn't bear it. If I couldn't be with her, then no one could. The room fell silent after the confession. Mitchell wrote down the details as Demetrius recounted how he had planned the murder, how he had used his knowledge of Tiffany's habits, how he had hoped the death would look like an accident. When the interrogation was over, the detective arrested Demetrius Clark on charges of first-degree murder. He did not resist when he was handcuffed and walked silently to the holding cell. A week later, the case was transferred to the prosecutor's office. Alicia Thompson and Tyrone Roberts testified at the preliminary hearing, describing Tiffany's toxic relationship with Demetrius and how she dreamed of freedom. The defendant's lawyer tried to get the charges reduced, citing passion and jealousy, but the evidence of premeditation was irrefutable. The court sentenced Demetrius Clark to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He accepted the sentence without emotion, as calmly as he had confessed to the murder. Tiffany Henderson was buried in a small cemetery in the suburbs of Vancouver. Her friends, blogging colleagues, and several hundred subscribers gathered at the funeral to say goodbye to the girl whose openness and sincerity had touched their hearts. Alicia gave a speech about how Tiffany deserved the right to choose her own destiny, not to become a victim of someone else's obsession. Tyrone Roberts stood aside, holding white roses in his hands. After the ceremony, he couldn't leave the cemetery for a long time, thinking about what their life together could have been like if it weren't for the cruelty of a man who couldn't let go of what no longer belonged to him.